Hello, this is Magic 063 Differentiable Manifolds. I'm Camille Mackenzie, and this podcast is about symplectic forms, just the very basic setup of symplectic structure on a manifold. And this podcast is meant as an illustration of the use of the Cartan calculus, and indeed I'll ask you to do most of it as exercises. So there's the definition. A symplectic form on a manifold is a two-form sigma such that d sigma is zero, so it's a closed form, and which is non-degenerate in the sense that if x is a tangent vector at a point M and sigma xy is zero for all the other tangent vectors y at that point, then x is zero. And of course, this is to apply at all points of the manifold. Just for a moment, think of an arbitrary two form. It can always be rearranged so that it's a map from the tangent bundle to the cotangent bundle. And since we've got the insert operator, there's a particular preference for the way to do that. So we get a map which sends a vector field, or a tangent vector, to the insert operator applied to sigma. And that gives a cotangent vector or a one form. And we denote this map by sigma flat. That's the musical symbol for flattening. This can be written slightly differently. Given a vector field x, take the one form sigma flat of x and pair it with another vector field y, and the result of that is simply sigma xy. Now, back to symplectic forms. From the non-degeneracy, it follows very quickly that sigma flat is an isomorphism of vector bundles from Tm to T star m. And this probably reminds you of Riemannian geometry, where you raise and lower indices using the metric. There are some similarities. There are some resemblances between the basic setup of symplectic geometry and the basic setup of Riemannian geometry. But there's a profound difference, and that is that in symplectic geometry, the form is alternating, whereas the Riemannian metric, of course, is symmetric. And this means that after the very beginnings, the two fields are really completely different. Just the same, there are some similarities at the starting level. Okay, so now take a function f, smooth function on M, and that defines a one form, df, and so I can take the pre-image of that under sigma flat, and that will be a vector field on M, and that's the classical Hamiltonian vector field for corresponding to the function f. And that can be written slightly differently if we use xf to insert into sigma, then what we get is df. By the way, sigma is closed. It can be exact. For example, every cotangent bundle of every manifold has a canonical symplectic structure, and that's defined in terms of a one form, which we did mention quite a long time ago. But the only, it's not really necessary to go back. The only point is that on a cotangent bundle, the symplectic form is actually exact, not merely closed. Okay, that's a side point. So now go back to the Cartan equation and use an arbitrary vector field x. Then the lead derivative with respect to x of sigma is given by the usual formula, and of course d sigma is zero by assumption, so that term drops out, and we've just got d of iota x sigma. So now if that X is a Hamiltonian vector field, then iota xf of sigma is df, and so we've actually got ddf, and that's 0. So the Lie derivative of sigma with respect to any Hamiltonian vector field is 0. And that can be interpreted, we haven't done flows yet, but we will, that can be interpreted as saying that sigma is constant along the flow lines of a Hamiltonian vector field. Now, this slide is concerned with the relationship between Poisson brackets and symplectic forms. So let's start with a symplectic form. And for two functions f and g, we get their Hamiltonians, we can plug them into sigma, and that gives a smooth function on M, and we define that to be the Poisson bracket of f and g. And this definition, by the way, goes back to the early 19th century. It's not a new idea. So I claim that that's a Poisson bracket. It's certainly alternating. It's certainly real bilinear. It's certainly true that each variable, if we hold f constant, then the other variable determines the derivation. The bracket itself is a biderivation. The thing that requires a bit of work is the Jacobi identity. But I hope you'll be able to do that, and you'll then have a genuine Poisson bracket as we defined it some time ago. Here's a proposition. The isomorphism of vector bundles, sigma flat, maps the bracket of vector fields, that's the ordinary bracket of vector fields that has nothing to do with symplectic geometry and nothing to do with Poisson brackets, to the Poisson bracket of one forms associated with the cotangent bundle. So again, I invite you to do this as an exercise. Now, there's a map associated with any Poisson bracket which goes from the cotangent to the tangent, and that's the map that sends a one form to its sharp, and I haven't really given that a symbol. I will denote it in anticipation of what's to come later by pi sharp, and I won't explain that at the moment, but I do want to have a symbol. So this map from one forms to vector fields is denoted pi sharp for the moment. It sends one forms to their sharp, and if we started with a df, then the vector field would be the Hamiltonian xf. So that's an isomorphism of vector bundles, and the inverse is sigma flat. Conversely, so this is going in the other direction, if we start with a Poisson bracket, and if the map pi sharp, again this map from one forms to vector fields, is an isomorphism of vector bundles, then its inverse goes from the tangent to the cotangent, and that is sigma flat for a symplectic form sigma that induces the given Poisson bracket. Now again, there's work to do here. Most of it is straightforward. The thing that requires a bit of work is proving that sigma is closed. Okay. So you can go from a symplectic form to a Poisson bracket. You can go from a Poisson bracket if the pi sharp map is an isomorphism, then you can go to a symplectic form. So living in the Poisson world, you can say that a symplectic manifold is a Poisson structure for which the pi sharp map is an isomorphism of vector bundles. So if you're a specialist in symplectic geometry, then you know all this, and that's fine. But for everybody else, I really urge you to do these statements as exercises. Okay, that's all for this podcast.